Hi Not Board Gamers and welcome back to Not Board Gaming. I'm your host, I'm Mark. So today's bite-side episode is an episode where we're going to be taking a look at two new factions for Cloudspire by Chip Theory Games. Now, if you checked out my review of Cloudspire, you can click the link above from last year, you'll know that I really like Cloudspire. Yes, it's a big and complex and sprawling game, but it offers so much playability for the solo player. And of course, if you check out the link above there now, you'll see that it featured highly in my list of top 10 games that I played solo in 2019. Now, the more I've played Cloudspire, the more I've absolutely grown to love it even more. Yes, there are lots of rules. Yes, it can seem a little bit overwhelming the first time you delve into it, but trust me, the more that you play this game, the more that you get out of it. So Chip Theory Games earlier this year contacted me and asked me if I'd like to take a look at two new factions which have been launched on Kickstarter for Cloudspire. And I said, of course, I jumped at this opportunity. But unfortunately, because of the coronavirus and the situation with COVID, they were held up in transit for over 4 weeks. And I only received them after the Kickstarter actually finished. However, that doesn't stop me doing this video, having a look at each of these factions, how they play, and give you a little bit of an overview of what my thoughts are on these factions. So not necessarily a review, but just a thought on each faction, how it plays based on the limited amount of time I've had them. So the two factions are Horizon's Wrath and the Uprising, and both of them play in a very different way, not only to each other, but to the rest of the factions that you've got in Cloudspire. Now, I'm pretty much all in on Cloudspire so far. I have the base game, I have the miniatures expansion, I have the Sky Mat, I have the Greed faction expansion, I also have Portal Seekers. So having two more factions and the various solo and co-op scenarios that come with it is a really exciting prospect for me. So, without much further ado, let's take a look at how each of the factions plays and what my thoughts are on them. So I think the first thing to say is that do remember that these are prototypes, these are not the finalised products. So they are representative, but they're not the finalised products. And the first faction that we're going to look at is the Uprising. Now, the Uprising is this kind of ragtag militia of mercenaries who are coming together to battle against the other opposing factions. And what you can see here is kind of what you get with the Uprising. Not only does it represent a kind of faction on its own, but with these extra market chips, it gives you an upgrade to the base game as well. But these market chips and the market chips that you get with the base game of Cloudspire are really necessary to make the Uprising work, because unlike your other factions in Cloudspire, the Uprising only comes with 9 chips. We have one hero, which is Netrut, there we go, Netrut, who's the only hero that comes with them. We have 2 Spire chips. They're both the same, on either side, different on either side, but 2 of the same chips. On one side there's Rubble Rouser, and on the other side we have the Rebuilt Ruins, and then we also have 2 minion chips as well, and these are Militia Defender and Militia Ranger, and as you can see they are the same on either side. And then we get these Waygate chips, which are absolutely necessary, because these will, as I'll explain in a bit, these will actually act as your fortress and your defense, and you have a Waygate and a destroyed Waygate, and that's it. That is literally the only kind of specific Uprising chips that come with this faction. There are some dice, and as I say, please remember that these are prototypes, so these are just stickers printed on dice as well, which are obviously for your kind of faction-specific fortress upgrades. And then you get this wealth of market chips, because what will happen is, even though you only get these 9 chips, which is not enough for a full barracks, is that the Uprising is actually going to draft more chips from the market and incorporate them into their ranks, and that way you get this fantastic way of absolutely having a different army to fight with each and every time you play. So how does that work then? Well, it's quite simple. So obviously you're going to set your barracks up, your factions up as you would normally. You're going to place your starting hero, which is Netrut, your 2 starting minions, which is your Militia Defender and your Militia Ranger, and your 2 starting Spire chips as well, which is the Rabble Rouser and the Rebuilt Ruins, into your barracks. Then what you're going to do is shuffle all the market chips together and draw from the top of the market stack until you've drawn 2 minions, 2 heroes, 2 spires and 1 piece of equipment, and then just set aside any other chips that you kind of pulled out that you didn't find for that, because you're going to mix them back in. Then what you do is you're going to place these drawn chips into your barracks and shuffle all the market stack again, and that's it. You've now created your unique, for each game, starting barracks. So I'm not going to go into loads of specifics as I'm talking about both these factions. I'm just going to highlight some of the different ways that these factions work. And one of the first things you'll notice on the Uprising's faction mat is that it's not connected to the mainland in any way. That's right. That's because you do not get literally from here to the adjacent starting position. What you're going to do is you're going to use the various waygates that come with the game, and these are going to be the ways that your faction actually get from their faction mat onto the mainland. So the first thing you're going to do when you first set up the faction is place 1 waygate on the map, and then when your heroes depart, they're going to depart from the waygate. Okay, so not from your faction mat to the waygate. But how, if this is not connected to there, how do your enemies attack your fortress? Well, they don't. What they're going to do is they're going to attack these waygates, and as you can see it says unstable waygate, and these will effectively act as your fortress. Any damage that happens to the waygates will come off your fortress health here. And of course when these are destroyed, they become a destroyed waygate which can no longer be used. And that's how they do it. So these waygates are great because what they allow you to do is move onto the map in various places, and Netorut, one of his core abilities is to build waygates. There we go. You can see on his upgraded side he can build waygates, so you can add more of these waygates to the map, which give you more opportunities to actually go around the map placing waygates on areas where you've got control and they must go next to the path. And that gives you more opportunities to actually put your minions and your heroes that you've drafted into your barracks out onto the map. But also, on a kind of minus side from that, what happens is the more waygates that are on the map, the more opportunities your opponents have got to actually attack these waygates and therefore destroy your fortress. So there's a real kind of plus minus benefit there in having this waygates, but it's a really unique way that the Uprising has in getting your minions and your heroes out onto the map. So that's how you kind of set up the waygates and how you get onto the map itself. Now, when we set up the barracks, the astute amongst you would have noticed that there aren't actually that many barracks, that many chips in the barracks, and that's right, because what you do is you will effectively use the market phase as the Uprising to increase the strength of your barracks. Now, what you don't do in the market phase is you don't pay any source for any unit chips that you buy. During the market phase, you will still pay your kind of 2 source for your Earthscape. So you'll have your market phase, you'll take a chip, put it in there, and then after the market phase, there's a special draft phase that's only open to the Uprising. And what happens there is any of the offerings and the market chips that are still there, is you could then make an additional purchase, and you will purchase these, an additional purchase for any of the chips that are then left in the market phase. Quite cleverly, what you can do as one of your actions is actually, if you don't like the look of any of those chips, you can discard them and draw out 3 new market chips. So the next time it comes around to the market phase, you've got a better chance of getting the units or spires or heroes or minions or whatever it is that you actually want. And that's where the constant drafting mechanism comes in, which is very different from the occasional drafting of all the other factions. And other than that, your Uprising factions will work based on various chips that you have drafted from the market, or you selected in your first kind of when you were setting up your barracks. There are a couple of bespoke kind of skills that are on the chips themselves. So as I've already mentioned, Netorut has the kind of build waygate option, which allows him to build waygates, but he's also got a lookout option on there as well. And what that does is when he's moved, it will allow him to then have a look at any landmark minions chips that are face down a certain number of moves, hexes away from where he currently is. And the other one is on the rebuilt ruins side of one of the Uprising's faction chips. There's an upgrade plans option, and what that does is that actually reduces the cost of any upgrade by 1 there. Then the rest of the options that are available are whatever comes on, as I mentioned, on the various market chips, which are either going to be from the Uprising expansion or the rest of your Cloudspire games. Now, let's have a quick look at how the fortress operates. obviously a huge part of Cloudspire is not just the various minions that are in play, but also kind of what can be done in your fortress actions. And of course the Uprising is no different to that. You get access to 3 different dice for the Uprising. Now, again, I will mention these are all obviously prototypes, so they are just stickers on mats, but obviously you will unlock these throughout the game. So the first one we'll look at is this the Rogue Garrison dice. And when you get this, and this costs 2 CP, it's called a signing bonus die. And what you will do at the start of your turn during the market phase, you may roll this dice. If you then select a market chip that matches the face that you've rolled during this, you will gain command points. So you will gain kind of, there are an additional command point if you roll a minion and you've selected a minion, or if you roll a hero and you've selected a hero. So it's a way to get additional additional CP. The next one we're going to look at is the Thieves' Den. Now, this costs 4 command points, or 4 source, should I say, and what this reward die does is once per wave at the end of your turn during the onslaught phase, you will roll this die and you will place it on any active unit. If your faction defeats this unit, gain the reward shown on the die in addition to the defeated unit's printed reward. So you could get effectively kind of, if you defeat a unit, you place it on an active unit, 2 source, or you could get a relic card, or you could get what else could you get? 2 command points or 4 source. So it's a way to earn additional goodies by putting that onto active units. Now the final one is this die over here, and this is the Spire Capacity die. And what you would do as a build option is during the build phase you may roll this die and place it on one of your spires in play. This way that spire's upgrade capacity is increased by the rolled results, and the max cost per upgrade is 3 source while the die remains here. To return this die to your fortress at the end of the wave, but you do not remove the upgrades if the spire is now above its capacity. So that is a way to absolutely increase the capacity on any spires, and only pay a limited amount in terms of source for upgrading there. So these are really, really, really useful kind of fortress upgrades that you can get in terms of the dies. So just like all the other factions, there are of course other upgrades which you can do within the fortress itself, and there's a brief look at the sheet. I'm not going to spoil these for you because I do think that part of the beauty about learning new factions in Cloudspire is learning what each individual fortress can do. But let me just give you a brief overview. For example, one of the upgrades will allow you to have 3 heroes on the map at any one time. I mean, that's brilliant, yeah? The other one will allow you to increase your CP depending on which minions you'll defeat, and there's lots of other things in there. This all adds to a really, really unique experience, and I think that's part of the beauty of Cloudspire, is this will completely change how you strategize your game of Cloudspire when you play with the Uprising. So, that's the Uprising. I say not a review, just an overview. Let's have a look now at Horizon's Wrath. Okay, so that was the Uprising, and that drafting mechanism is absolutely quite unique in terms of how the various factions play in Cloudspire. However, next up, we're going to be looking at Horizon's Wrath, which is the other new faction, probably one that people may well know a little bit more about, because the difference in Horizon's Wrath is that this particular faction doesn't have a static fortress. Horizon's Wrath is actually on a floating airship that can, at some point, if you want it to, move around the map. So let's have a look at Horizon's Wrath in a little bit more detail. A floating airship? That's exactly right. And here's what you get with the Horizon's Wrath upgrade. So of course we get the faction mat, and as you can see, there is no connection to the main game board, main game mats at all. Represented with the clouds on the other side of this airship here that is floating high above. You're going to get 2 dice which you can use for various things. We'll come on to those later. You're going to get a full complement of heroes, minions and spires. So unlike the Uprising, this comes with a full barracks. It's only supplemented by minions and spires and mercs, etc. in the market phase as a normal faction. And the other unique piece that you're going to get is a plank, and as you can see on there, again, as with the Uprising, these are prototypes. This says placeholder art on it, so chances are that it may not be replaced as such, but it's going to be upgraded in one way or another, and that's what you get with your Horizon's Wrath faction upgrade here, or faction edition here. So let's have a look at a little bit more detail in how these actually works. So straight away you will notice, as I mentioned earlier, that there is no connection here between the faction mat and the main board itself, and that's because this plank, it's a pirate ship, people. This plank has to be in place for, first of all, your units to travel from the ship onto the mat, and secondly, for any of your opposing factions to come into the area where they can attack the fortress, and I'll explain how this can have some tactical advantage in a bit. Other than that, it operates in more or less the same way. You're going to take your various chips that you have in your loadout from your barracks, and there's a gunner, and he's got a range of 2, and you will put them on your plank there, and he will move forward his 2 spaces and progress, and you will do that for your heroes, etc. And in reality, it will operate in exactly the same way as every other faction. So unlike the Uprising, which has waygates and where it comes out into the board, this will operate in the standard faction, in the standard ways of most factions, where you will just use this chip as your kind of entry onto the mat. And of course, that's where, as I mentioned, the opposing units can actually come on there and attack your fortress. However, because it's a chip, because it's portable, of course, if you can place the chip at some point, you might be able to remove the chip, and that has some serious advantage. That's right, because one of the key things that you can do is you can remove this plank in one of 2 ways. First of all, if you have upgraded the captain's cabin to its 2nd upgrade, which I think costs 6 CP points, you will then have the ability to pull the plank, and what that will do is that will remove that chip from your faction mat, and effectively that will mean that any opposing units cannot fire upon you, but of course it also means that you cannot absolutely then launch any more units from there, because if there are any units, be it yours or be it opposing faction chips, on this plank when you pull it, then all of those units will absolutely die and perish, and therefore there's a real kind of advantage in time on when you can do that, if and when you do it. The other way that you can absolutely remove and pull the plank is through what's called a strategic maneuver, and that is perhaps the most revolutionary thing about Horizon's Wrath. Because in a stroke of absolute genius, what the guys at Chip Theory Games have done is created a way for you to, when things are feeling way overpowered for you, is for you to actually revitalise your game. So take this example. Here we go, we've got a raft of Grove Tenders coming up. We have a 4-strength Treed on the plank. We have 5-strength Ibanth behind that, and we also have Daiwan behind that as well, and it looks like my fortress is going to be destroyed. Well, once per game in the onslaught mode, what you can do is reduce all your CP for naught, and then you can pull the plank. Now, as I mentioned, pulling the plank means taking that chip away, so there's no direct connection, and it also destroys anything on the plank as well. And there we go. So that's that tree destroyed. Then what you can do is your flying fortress can effectively up wings and take root and move to another isle that's either another space, it's either on the same hex that you were on, or isle that you were on, or on an isle adjacent to it. Of course, this has to be touching all 3 sides, and it must be leading to a path. And then what you can do is restate your plank, and suddenly you created this advantage now whereby you've moved the goalposts, and of course any of the bad guys that were the opposing faction that were going down here have now, if they're heroes, have got to go all the way around here. It gives you a way to change the course of the game, but as I mentioned, you can only do this once per game. And that particular feature is certainly what excites me about using Horizon's Wrath, and I think it will excite quite a lot of other people as well. Just the ability to change your strategy and your tactics kind of halfway through any particular game to benefit you and to gain you advantage, I think is a really strong thing. Now, as I mentioned, it's got a full complement of barracks, and without going over too too many of the new abilities. Let's just have a look at a few of them. So what I particularly like is the Powder Monkey, and that has a detonate ability. So obviously when that's down and defeated, what it will do is detonate and affect any units around it. Also, some of the heroes have a swordsmanship ability on there, and what that will do is that will increase their relative strength of their attack based on the units around them. Now, in a particularly useful way as well, or a different way as well, is how you upgrade some of your minions. They can be upgraded in a couple of ways, and one of them is through using a swabby. Now, these units have absolutely no attack abilities. They attack and retaliate for nothing. They have a 1 health, but what happens is when these are defeated, they will sacrifice themselves, when that will give you then the ability to upgrade a minion on your map. But that does provide limited upgrade opportunities. So when a swabby is defeated, what you need to do, rather than putting it kind of next to your barracks, to put it back into your barracks, is you have to spend 2 souls to actually kind of save that swabby, if you like, so you can use them again. So there's a lot of tactics and strategy there in terms of how you actually plan out some of how your units operate and how you upgrade your units. Now, as I mentioned, there is a large swathe of potential units there and spires, and of course you will have the usual market options for Horizon's Wrath, but I do particularly think that the ability to pick up that fortress and move it around the board once per game is a huge thing. So let's have a look at some of those fortress abilities now. So in terms of dice-based abilities that the fortress have, there are 2. The first one we're going to look at is this Captain's Cabin down here. You're going to pay 4 CP for this, and you will gain the morale die. And what you will do is you will tick this up by 1 every time you defeat an opposing unit, either through your fortress retaliation, damage from a cannonball, or pulling the plank, or a unit with the talent morale, or using a unit with the talent morale. Then during your prep phase, what you can do is actually tick that down by 1 and increase your amount of CP that you've got. So that's a way of actually gaining more CP. The other one that we got here is over on the gun deck, and this is particularly pleasing. So you will see that there are 4 cannons here. You have your cannons 1 and 2, which are these 2 here, and your cannons 3 and 4. If you've got this die and you have this die and you've unlocked it, and you've say you've only unlocked the first one on here, which is level 1A at a cost of 4, that means that you will be able to fire cannonballs if you've got some cannonballs in here from your cannons 1 and 2. And what that will do is you will tick that down by 1 and you will roll a spire die. So that could be a blank, it could be a 1, or it could be a 2 damage, and then that you'll fire from one of these cannons then, and it will hit the first either minion, spire, or fortress that it comes along in a straight line and deal that amount of damage to it, which is quite a powerful thing. If you're lined up correctly in terms of where your faction mat is placed and where your opposing faction mat is placed, it could well be that you are blasting onto their fortress, and that's only on these first 2 cannons. If you unlock the next go, then what happens is you can also fire from cannons 3 or 4 as well, which is really interesting, and that adds a whole new level of kind of strategy and tactics to the gameplay in terms of whether you're going to use these cannons to blast out your opposition. So that's kind of the die-based ones. There are, of course, lots of other options available in the Fortress upgrades. For example, there's gunboat calibration. Now, one of the dies that you get is or one of the spies you get is your gunboat, and you can see it's got a tiny little red arrow on there. You set the orientation on that when you first place that spy, and it will fire in that direction and that direction only. What gunboat orientation on here, if you unlock it, will allow you then to actually change that orientation. Or maybe I mentioned these swabbies that you kind of use to upgrade, and then you have to pay 2 CP to get them back. You can reduce the cost of those accordingly by 1 and take that down to 1 CP, which means that you have more of a chance of actually reusing your swabbies. And that is how the Horizon's Wrath faction works in the main. Okay, so that's both of the new factions spoken about. We have the Uprising and we also have Horizon's Wrath, and I think you'll agree with me that both of them add something very new and very different into the game. Now, there were no solo scenarios available for me to play, so what I've had to do is I've had to use an adaptation on the endless modes for both to test out both factions. I'm barely scratching the surface. I genuinely like using both factions for very, very different reasons. I do think for a more immediate kind of effect, then most people will jump straight into Horizon's Wrath. That is, your units laid and set out, it's the same units every time, and it's obviously the faction map that operates in a very, very different way, but that gives a more immediate sense, and maybe people new to the game will actually quite like using Horizon's Wrath. However, if you're a little bit more experienced in Cloudspire, now I am more experienced, I'm not saying I'm any better, but certainly more experienced in playing Cloudspire, then the endlessly kind of almost infinite options that you get from using the Uprising by using those market chips in that effective drafting way can absolutely create a different and completely unique experience each and every time. And I'm going to be really interested to see what the guys at Chips Theory do with the kind of solo scenarios that are coming out in the new lore book that's coming with both of these factions. It'd be interesting to see how they incorporate the solo scenarios and the co-op scenarios. As we know, Cloudspire is an exceptionally strong solo game and co-op game, and I think that having these new factions to play with will be really, really useful. Now, in terms of kind of, as I mentioned, and not so much negatives on these, because they're new factions, there aren't really any negatives. They are adding more and different ways to play the game. I think there's only that barrier to entry that potentially the Uprising offers, in the fact that you're only going to get used to playing a very small selection of the faction chips every single game. The other chips that you select through the market option and the drafting option are going to require you to relearn new ways of strategizing and playing the chips. Now, we know that Cloudspire is a keyword and a rules-heavy game, and these do nothing to detract from that. But once you've absolutely got the core mechanics of Cloudspire down, then that shouldn't be too much of an issue. And that's it, guys. Thank you very much for joining me on this very special Not Board Gaming bite-sized episode where we looked into the two new factions for Cloudspire from Chip Theory Games. Look, as I mentioned, these are prototypes. I don't have the full scenarios available yet, so the artwork will change. There may be other changes that that will take place as well before the final production copies go out to people around about November time. What I can say is I think these are absolutely great. It's more new ways to play Cloudspire, more new ways for you to learn how to kind of change your game with Cloudspire, and more new ways to play against other people. So thank you very much to the guys at Chip Theory Games for giving me the opportunity to have a look at these factions. I will say, obviously, the Kickstarter's over. There may be a late pledge happening now, and if you're watching this video way after all that, then you will probably have the opportunity to buy them from the Chip Theory website and store. But what I will say is that if you like Cloudspire, there is absolutely nothing here to make you not want to get these factions. So for me, if you've got Cloudspire and you want to play more Cloudspire, these are an essential purchase. So thank you once again for joining me at Not Board Gaming. My name's been Mark. My name is Mark. Remember, you can follow us on Facebook or Instagram. That's Not Board Gaming, always BORED. Do remember to like and subscribe to the channel. Do check out our other videos. And one final thought from me: if you can't find anybody else to play with, there's nothing wrong with playing with yourselves. Until next time.